Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Just
Yes.
great, great. Alrighty, I guess can everyone see the screen? I only have one monitor, so.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Christina Liu, and I'm here to talk about cloud vendor risk management for beginners. That's that. Who am I? Once again, my name is Christina Liu. I am a senior security engineer at Cisco Meraki. I am also a certified information privacy technologist. I am at Cthulhu on Twitter. And I also have a website, christina-liu.com, because sometimes I write blog posts about my talks. So, table of contents. We're going to first start out with what is vendor risk management and risk assessment. Then we're going to get into why this is important. 3, we're then going to talk about how one would do a risk assessment and also talk about some foundational policies and knowledge one would have to be able to do a successful risk assessment. And 4thly, we're going to talk about what are the skills you would need in order to pivot into this role or to do this type of work. So what is it? Risk assessment. Essentially, what you're trying to do is you are measuring the risk associated with integrating your company information with a third-party cloud vendor. So examples of third-party cloud vendors are basically any SaaS apps we use. So Slack, AWS, GitHub. Essentially, if your company doesn't own that code and it's a cloud app and you're using it, that is a third-party cloud vendor. So again, you are measuring the risk associated. So you're going to assign the vendor a risk score, either low, medium, high, or critical. And then once you've assigned that risk score, you can then determine if the risk is acceptable for the company or the organization to then share data with the vendor. So because maybe installing a sketchy dog emoji counting Slack app is not worth the risk, but the usage of Slack itself is worth the risk because it drives productivity and communications within an organization. Now, after that, you can then try to think of any mitigations that would need to happen in order to keep the risk low when you integrate or onboard this vendor. Essentially, what you're asking is, what do we need to do to enable the teams to use this vendor with as little risk to the organization as possible? So why is this important? Well, firstly, this is important because data breaches are bad and data breaches are expensive. And yes, data breaches can happen from internal security misconfigurations and vulnerable features, but these data breaches can also happen if your vendor is not keeping your data safe. And it stings even more when it's your vendor doing this because you are paying for their services. So because you're paying for services, you would hope that they're keeping your data safe. This is also important because a lot of compliance standards require third-party risk management programs. So if your company or organization is trying to go and get the SOC 2, PCI DSS cert, FedRAMP, any of these larger, or ISO, things like that, you're going to need to have a program in place. And if you know that your company is trying to get one of these, it's a good idea to try to implement this early than rushing to scramble to finish the work at the end. Special note about risk management programs is this may look different across different companies and different organizations. depending on various factors like the size of your company, or maybe even the security program maturity of the company. Generally, newer companies have less mature security programs and therefore a less built out risk management program. So here are some things that you're going to want to consider when you're doing the actual third-party vendor review itself. So the first thing you want to ascertain is the authority of the requester. Essentially, you're asking the question of, does the person asking me to review this application have the authority to sign contracts and also pay for them? This is a little bit of self-preservation because you don't want to waste your time reviewing any applications that will not get approved on the higher management levels. Also, due to security features and things like that, you might not be able to use a free version, even if a free one exists. Most of the time, in order to get security features like single sign-on, logging, potentially even MFA, you would need an enterprise version, and enterprise versions cost money. So it's important to have someone that has the ability to pay for things or okay budgets be the approver here. And a cool thing here is when you figure out who this person is, this is considered an application owner. And you've also managed to figure out a point of contact if a security incident happens, because this is the person that a detection and response team or investigations team will then contact. Usually, this person is in a position of like a senior management role, a director, and if you are within a smaller organization, it really is the person with the purchasing power. So again, if you're in a small startup, it may be the person with a credit card. But if you're in a larger organization, finding this person can be tricky. So it is a good idea to work with a procurement team, a legal team, or a finance team to be able to point you to the right person. And you will most likely be working closely with these teams because at the end of the day, these teams can dictate whether or not the vendor actually gets onboarded. Because if your procurement team or finance team doesn't pay the bill, the vendor is not going to let you use their services. And if legal says no to the contract, then again, the vendor is not going to be onboarded. So another thing that you're going to want to think about when you're doing these risk assessments is the idea of data classification. And essentially, you're trying to figure out what types of data is being either passed, transformed, stored by the cloud vendor. And you're going to want to rank this data in buckets of classification. So for example, is the data being passed to the vendor considered public data or confidential data or highly confidential restricted data? Examples of some data that could be potentially highly confidential or restricted is information like personally identifiable information, or PII. Another one is HIPAA data, which is basically PII for healthcare data for healthcare. And with both these types of data, they are protected and restricted by legal frameworks. So if there is mishandling of this data, there can be legal consequences and severe fines. So it's a good idea to restrict this data or classify it in the highly confidential or restricted. Now, there's other types of information that you would want to classify of a higher restriction. And while these don't have legal consequences, they can affect the public perception of your company if the data got leaked. So information like this is active sales lead data. You don't want your competitor getting a hold of what your sales team is doing or who they're talking to or for how much money. Another one here is information on things like unreleased products. It is not a good look if your company accidentally leaks this information. So to create this data matrix, what you're going to want to do is work with your legal team because of the potential for legal repercussions if the data gets classified incorrectly. And what you're going to be doing with the legal team is creating a data matrix. This here is an incredibly simplified version of a data matrix. So if you look on the pink column, you can see that the data is being classified as either, or here are the classifications of the data, of either public, the confidential, the restricted, and then you can give it terms and information. So for example, for the public data, if you look in the middle column, it says approval. This can say, well, for public information, the people then can approve this application or be an app owner is a manager, whereas confidential data is a senior manager and restricted data is a director. And with the data matrix, you can say, give it reassessment schedules, any SLA terms can all fit into this data matrix. Data matrices, or matrices can help you figure out what you need to do in order to do the risk assessment, because for applications that are just of a public classification or potentially confidential, you may be able to use a scan or third-party assessor to determine risk of a vendor, whereas something that is rated as restricted may trigger a pen test in order to do the review. And if your company has a privacy or ethics team or people that work in these places, you will need to ask them for their input as well, because privacy is a very fast evolving sector. And what might not be a law right now could be a law in like the next year. Or if you're in Colorado, there are new privacy laws coming this July. So work with a privacy person. So after you've figured out a data classification and data matrix framework, you're going to also need to do what's called the implementation review. And at this point, you're going to be speaking with the team that wants to use this application. And you're going to want to ask the question, what other systems is this app connecting to? We are living more and more so in a world of interconnected dashboards and integrations. And you really want to see where else the information is being spread to, because this may lead to more vendor reviews if the applications that the secondary applications that they're sending information to hasn't been reviewed yet. And the type of things that you're going to want to look at when you're doing this review is data diagrams. Does the team have any design documentation or any information to give you an idea of, one, the type of information being sent, or any security controls they are thinking about using? What does their authentication look like? Is there encryption? So all of that good stuff. You may want to review some API object calls to make sure they're passing information along that's not too sensitive or sensitive. And you're going to want to threat model with the team. Now, I find threat modeling to be one of the best ways to get any other team to feel like they're a part of the security team. So what I like to do is I like to ask the person or the team to put on their hacker hat and ask them, if they were to hack their own system, how would they do it? Sometimes the answers don't surprise you, but sometimes they really do. After they've figured out a method of attack, you can then ask them, what is the implication or the impact of this attack? After you get an answer, you can then also ask them, do we have any mitigating controls already in place in order to mitigate the attack or the impact of this attack? And what's really cool here is that people really do come away with the experience feeling like they're part of the team and part of the review process. I've actually had a team come back to me 2 days later and report that they found instances of fraud because they went through this little review by themselves, and they eliminated the fraud. So that was pretty cool. And so especially if you're the only person doing risk reviews, you're going to be having conversations with almost every team in the organization. So you're going to need to be able to speak to and define remediations and requirements for both the engineering side of the house and also what I like to call the run the business side of the house, like your sales team, the marketing, the HR teams, basically anyone not in engineering. And because of everyone coming to you, you're going to basically be a security influencer within the organization. So you really have a lot of power to teach good security habits and hygiene. So after you've done an implementation review, you're going to need to try to figure out and understand what the vendor's security posture looks like in terms of their internal controls. So some useful documents that you would need or want to do this is figure out if your vendor has a SOC 2 Type 2 report. This report is very extensive and has a ton of information about what their internal controls look like, from do their employees have training in security to what does their deployment and SDLC look like. So it's a good review. It's a good report. Another one that you can use to determine risk is if they have a PCI DSS certificate, or if they have an ISO 27001 certificate. If you can get it, it'd be a good idea to get their penetration test report to see if they had any vulnerabilities, and more importantly, to see if they remediated those vulnerabilities, because a lot of companies will do their penetration tests early in the year. And if it's later in the year and you get it, they may have had high vulnerabilities in the beginning of the year, but by the time it gets to you, if they've remediated it, then the risk does go down. Also, another good idea, other documents that you would want to look at is, did they write any security white papers? Do they have any architectural diagrams? Do they have a bug bounty program? Essentially, you want to get your hands on any information that will give you a better idea of what their security posture looks like. And a cool thing about these documents is that larger companies actually do have self-service portals that you can pull this information from, so you don't have to talk to the vendor directly. If they don't have this, then it's completely okay to reach out to their sales team to get this information. Generally, sales is more than happy to help you out, especially if you have a big contract. A special note about these various certificates, so like the SOC 2, PCI, etc. While these certificates are not green lights on their own, it does mean that the risk does go down, because in order to maintain these certifications, they do need to be audited by a third party every single year. So risk acceptance. At the end of this whole review, you will produce that risk score. Remember, is it a low risk, high risk, medium risk? And with this risk score, it can be something as official as a giant report, or something as more casual as a JIRA ticket, depending on the size of your company and the security program maturity. And this is important because sometimes high risk apps are worth it. A sales contract might depend on it, a feature might depend on it. Sometimes it's worth it because leadership said so. And if leadership said so, and we do need to make these compromises, then you will have a written acceptance. Leadership is making conscious decisions on whether or not to accept this risk. So when you produce that risk score, get a risk acceptance in writing, either in an email or like a JIRA ticket comment or something like that, that says, I, senior director, acknowledge and accept the risk of using this app. Oh, there we go. Managers and leaders should be consciously accepting risk. So another thing to think about is the idea of remediations. So if we have to accept a high risk app, can we use it with caveats? For example, maybe we can accept the usage of a high risk application only for a proof of concept state. and only for 90 days to see if the team wants to use this, because maybe at the end of the 90 days, we cut it from our system and becomes not a problem anymore. Or can we put an SLA on when mitigations will be deployed? And maybe for things like, if it is a high-risk app, maybe mitigations around the authentication has to be implemented in 30 days. If they're not deployed by 30 days, we kick it from our system. Or logging within 90 days, and if it's not there, we kick it from our system. And with these remediations, you can, again, provide these hard sunset timelines of, if we don't do it by XYZ date, it goes away. So another thing that you're going to eventually have to do is a reassessment. This comes much later down the line. And it's essentially the idea that your vendors will need to be reassessed to make sure that they are maintaining high quality security controls and that they're maintaining their certifications. Another reason to do this is because as time goes on, teams grow, teams change, and other teams might want to use this tool. So for example, a sales team is using a tool, HR team finds out about it, and they want to use it. Well, HR data is more restrictive than sales data. So it may bump up the data classification of this application, and more requirements will then be needed in order to use this app safely. So this also, you can try to figure out if any security controls change along the way, because again, a use case might change or more teams might want to use it. And a good way to track when reassessment needs to happen is to put these applications on a schedule. So remember the data matrix in the beginning. You can say that confidential applications need to be reassessed every 2 years, whereas restricted apps need to be reassessed every 1 year. So let that data matrix guide you on when you need to reassess apps. And finally, don't reinvent the wheel. This industry has been around for quite some time, so don't feel like you're alone and that you have no help. This is a resource I like a whole bunch. It's called the Consensus Assessment Initiative Questionnaire, also known as CAKE. It is a fairly short security questionnaire, has 70 questions, and this you can give to the vendor. If the vendor doesn't have a SOC 2 or an ISO cert, maybe with this questionnaire, they can answer it. And then if you get a pen test report, you can also derive a good idea of what their security posture looks like. NIST is out there. It's a big standard. If you're trying to go for any of these larger certifications, definitely use this. It's very big. Do with it what you will. And if you are a subsidiary within a larger organization, you should see what policies or tools your larger organization may have, because they may have access to like cool tools and third-party assessors for you to be able to use to help you do your job easier. Speaking of job, how to get this job? Well, this type of work is generally considered in the governance risk compliance area. And there are risk management engineers. So the type of experience that can help enable this work is any sort of development experience, because you may be asked to review JavaScript code snippets or SQL queries or JSON blobs looking for sensitive information. You're definitely going to need a threat model. If you're good at it, awesome. If you're not good at it yet, you should get good at it. You can check out the STRIDE methodology. If you're very good at document searching to find exactly what you need, this is good for you. Sometimes SOC 2 Type 2 reports can be like 200 pages long, so it's good if you know how to find things quickly. And this is one of the most important ones, is the strong communication skills, because for a lot of people, you may be the first security person they have ever talked to. So a lot of the times you will be teaching basic security concepts and ideas to so many people. And honestly, if you have overlapping skills from any other industries, this is super helpful. So if you have information on like the finance industry, healthcare industry, law, anything, this is great because you're, again, especially if you're the only person in the organization doing these risk reviews, you're going to be reviewing apps from all parts of the company, right? So remember, you may be asked to review a Slack app that counts dog emojis to mission critical applications like AWS. So yeah, once again, my name is Christina Liu. I want to thank the Women's Society of Cyber Jitsu for allowing me to come and speak. And also thank you so much to everyone watching.